Every summer for 7 years, my parents packed my duffel bag in the second week of June, dropped me at my Aunt Vivian's house in upstate New York, and vanished until September. They did this so my older brother Liam could have what my mother called the core family vacations: 2 weeks in Tuscany, sailing in Maui, skiing the Swiss Alps. I was the outsourced utility child, the budget cut that funded his golden lifestyle. The day I received my high school diploma, my car was already packed. By midnight, I was unpacking in another state, and they had no idea which one. It took them 3 years to track me down. But when they finally walked through the glass doors of my accounting firm, my mother did not bring an apology. She brought a legal binder. Before I tell you what was inside it, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with people who only loved you when you were convenient. My name is Claire. I am 21 years old, and I work as a junior auditor at a forensic accounting firm in Charleston, South Carolina. The humidity here settles into your bones, a thick heat that forces everything to slow down. But the moment the brass bell above our reception door chimed that Tuesday morning, the air in the room went brittle. Patricia and Richard stood in the entryway. My parents. I had not seen them in 36 months. Patricia wore her signature beige trench coat, her hair blown out into the same stiff, immaculate shape she maintained for country club brunches. Richard stood half a step behind her, adjusting his watch. They looked exactly the same, untouched by the mystery of a daughter who had erased herself from their lives. I stood up from my desk near the glass partition. For a brief second, the naive part of my brain expected a gasp, a sudden rush of tears, a mother relieved to find her missing child breathing and well. Instead, Patricia bypassed the reception chairs, marched directly to the polished granite counter, and dropped a 3-inch thick legal binder onto the surface. The thud echoed through the quiet office. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask how I survived the last 3 years alone. She looked at me with a tight, practiced smile that barely reached her chin. "Aunt Vivian passed away," she said, her tone devoid of mourning. "And you are going to sign this waiver today, Claire." The words hit my chest like a physical blow. Vivian was gone. The only woman who ever bothered to ask if I was hungry. The woman who spent those 7 exiled summers teaching me how to read balance sheets at her kitchen table while my family drank wine in Florence was dead. A sharp ache bloomed behind my ribs, but the grief hit a wall of instant suspicion. Patricia despised Vivian. They had not spoken a civil word in a decade. My parents had not spent 3 years hunting me down to deliver an obituary. They hired a private investigator to find me because that binder held something they desperately needed me to surrender. Every summer for 7 years, my parents packed my duffel bag in the second week of June, dropped me at my Aunt Vivian's house in upstate New York, and drove away. They did this so my older brother Liam could have what my mother called family vacations: 2 weeks in Tuscany, sailing in Maui, skiing the Swiss Alps. I was the outsourced utility child, the budget cut that funded his golden lifestyle. The day I received my high school diploma, my car was already packed. By midnight, I was unpacking in another state, and they had no idea which one. It took them 3 years to track me down. But when they finally walked through the glass doors of my accounting firm, my mother did not bring an apology. She brought a legal binder. Before I tell you what was inside it, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with people who only loved you when you were convenient. My name is Claire. I am 21 years old, and I work as a junior auditor at a forensic accounting firm in Charleston, South Carolina. The air here settles into your lungs, a thick heat that forces the whole city to move at a slow drawl. It is a long way from the manicured suburbs of Ohio where I grew up, which was the entire point of moving here. From the time I was 11 until I turned 18, my role in the household was strictly arithmetic. Patricia and Richard, my parents, were obsessed with cultivating an image of coastal wealth. But maintaining that image required liquid capital, and raising 2 children drained too much of it. Their solution was simple: send the quiet daughter away. Every June, Richard idled his sedan in Aunt Vivian's gravel driveway, while Patricia gave me a tight hug that smelled like expensive hairspray. Then they headed to the airport. Liam received the world. I received 3 months of upstate New York humidity. Patricia curated glossy social media albums titled The Core Family Vacations, featuring the 3 of them smiling on yachts and alpine balconies. I was never in the frame. What my parents failed to realize was that Vivian did not just babysit me. She was a retired comptroller with a mind like a steel trap. While Liam was learning how to order room service in Italian, Vivian was teaching me how to read balance sheets, trace hidden assets, and spot phantom revenue on a tax return. She gave me the tools to decode the very system my parents used to exclude me. On the morning of my high school graduation, I did not walk the stage to collect my diploma. I slipped a prepaid phone into my pocket, merged onto the interstate, and drove south until the pine trees turned into palm trees. I secured an entry-level job in a firm that specialized in financial autopsies, and I built a quiet, solvent life. I thought I had closed the book on my family. Then came a Tuesday morning last month. The brass bell above our reception door chimed, cutting through the hum of the air conditioning. I looked up from my dual monitors and felt the blood drain from my face. Patricia and Richard stood in the entryway. I had not seen them in 36 months. Patricia wore a tailored trench coat, her hair styled into the exact immaculate shape she maintained for her country club luncheons. Richard stood half a step behind her, checking his silver watch. They looked pristine, entirely untouched by the mystery of a daughter who had erased herself from their lives. I stood up from my desk. For a brief second, the naive corner of my brain expected a rush of relief, a mother glad to find her missing child breathing and safe. Instead, Patricia bypassed the reception chairs and marched straight to my desk. She dropped a thick leather binder onto the polished wood. The thud echoed against the glass walls. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask how I had survived. She looked at me with a practiced smile that carried all the warmth of a winter freeze. "Aunt Vivian passed away," she said, her tone devoid of mourning. "And you are going to sign this waiver today, Claire." The words hit my chest hard. Vivian was gone. A sharp ache bloomed behind my ribs, but the grief immediately hit a wall of cold suspicion. Patricia despised Vivian. They had not spoken a civil word in a decade. My parents had not spent 3 years hunting me down to deliver an obituary. They had hired an investigator because that binder held something they desperately needed me to surrender. And based on the rigid posture of my father standing by the door, whatever was inside those pages was a matter of financial survival. I stared at the thick leather binder resting on my desk. The cover was bound in dark calfskin embossed with the gold foil logo of a prominent Chicago law firm. The air conditioning in the Charleston office hummed a steady, quiet rhythm above us, but the sound seemed to fade into a hollow ringing in my ears. Aunt Vivian was gone. The words hung in the space between me and my parents, sharp and jagged. Vivian had been the only true north on my compass. While my parents chased social status across Europe, Vivian had spent her summers teaching me the difference between gross margins and net profit over slices of warm cherry pie. She smelled of vanilla extract and ledger paper, a woman who built her own quiet empire, while her sister, my mother, married into a hollow illusion of one. The idea that Vivian had passed away alone hundreds of miles from where I sat brought a sudden crushing weight to my throat. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to step outside into the sweltering South Carolina heat and mourn the only woman who had ever actually parented me. But grief is a luxury you cannot afford when you are standing across from predators. I looked at Patricia. Her posture was rigid, her chin tilted at that familiar angle of calculated superiority. She did not offer a comforting hand. She did not lower her voice. She had not spent the last 3 years paying a private investigator to scour the eastern seaboard because she missed her daughter. She hunted me down because she needed my ink on a piece of paper. I pulled my attention away from the sudden loss of my aunt and focused on the binder. I opened the heavy cover. The first page was a summary of the Vivian Foster Revocable Trust. The second page was a waiver of beneficiary rights and consent to contest. I am an auditor. My daily life consists of reading the fine print that other people ignore. I scan the legal jargon, translating the dense paragraphs into plain English in real time. Vivian had not just left me her savings account. She had left me her entire commercial real estate portfolio. According to the schedule of assets attached to the back, Vivian owned 4 strip malls, 2 logistics warehouses, and a prime piece of downtown retail space. The total estimated valuation sat just north of $7 million. She had bypassed Patricia entirely. She had bypassed Liam entirely. She had named me the sole beneficiary and the sole executor of her estate. Patricia tapped her manicured fingernail against the waiver page. She wanted me to sign away my rights, effectively agreeing that Vivian was of unsound mind when the trust was drafted. Doing so would dissolve the trust and push the estate into intestate succession, positioning my mother as the primary legal heir. "You need to initial the bottom of the first page and sign the second," Patricia instructed. Her tone was brisk, the exact cadence she used to order a waiter to replace a lukewarm coffee. "We have a notary waiting down the street." I looked up from the document. "Why would I sign a waiver invalidating the trust, Patricia?" Richard stepped forward, bringing his imposing frame closer to my desk. He attempted to soften his expression into something resembling paternal concern, but his eyes remained cold. Because Vivian was not thinking clearly at the end, Claire. She made reckless decisions. We are simply correcting a clerical error. Liam is restructuring his tech company right now, and the family ecosystem needs this capital to keep everything balanced. It is the mature thing to do. The audacity of the statement settled over me like a winter chill. Liam. It always came back to Liam. The Golden Son was restructuring his company, which in our family code meant Liam was burning through cash and needed a bailout. My parents had located the abandoned daughter to strip her of a $7 million inheritance just to feed Liam's burning engine. I did not raise my voice. I kept my hands folded neatly on top of the binder. And if I refused to sign, Patricia let the polite facade drop. The church smile vanished, replaced by the ruthless pragmatism she wielded behind closed doors. "If you refuse to sign, Claire, we will file a formal contest in probate court tomorrow morning. We have retained the best litigators in New York. We will claim undue influence. We will claim diminished capacity. We will drag this estate through the courts for 10 years. You will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars defending a dead woman's signature. By the time the lawyers take their cut, the real estate will be foreclosed on, the liquid assets will be drained, and you will walk away with nothing." The ultimatum was clear. Sign over the inheritance to fund Liam's lifestyle, or watch my parents burn Vivian's life's work to ash in a courtroom. They were banking on the assumption that I was still the quiet, compliant teenager they had shipped off to upstate New York. They expected me to shrink under the threat of litigation, to surrender the fortune just to avoid the confrontation. But I was no longer the girl on the porch holding a duffel bag. I was a junior auditor in a forensic accounting firm. I spent 50 hours a week tearing apart financial records, finding hidden offshore accounts, and proving corporate fraud. I understood the mechanics of money better than Richard and Patricia ever would. I looked at the header on the legal documents. The law firm representing my parents was a top-tier litigation group in Manhattan. They did not work on contingency. A probate contest of this magnitude required a retainer of at least $100,000 just to file the initial motions. My mind began to race, clicking through the variables like a sorting algorithm. My parents lived a high-overhead lifestyle, but they were notoriously cash poor. They leased their luxury cars. They mortgaged their home to the roofline to maintain their country club memberships. They did not have $100,000 in liquid cash sitting in a checking account to hire a Manhattan litigation firm. So where did the retainer come from? If they were trying to steal this money to save Liam's tech startup, it meant Liam was also desperate for cash. Yet somehow they had procured a premium legal defense team to strong-arm me. The math did not reconcile. There was a glaring discrepancy in the narrative Richard was trying to sell me. People who are broke do not hire premium litigators unless they have found a hidden source of leverage, or unless they are gambling with someone else's money. Patricia mistook my silence for submission. She pulled a gold-trimmed pen from her designer handbag and placed it on top of the waiver. "Just sign the paperwork, Claire. You have a nice little job here. You do not want the stress of a multi-state legal battle disrupting your quiet life. Family supports family." I stared at the pen. My pulse maintained a steady, measured beat. I felt the familiar cold focus that always washed over me when an audit presented a broken equation. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a refusal right then and there. I was not going to throw a tantrum or yell about the injustice of my childhood. Confrontation without leverage is just noise, and I had learned early on that making a fuss never served the person without the power. To beat them, I had to understand the exact geometry of their desperation. I needed to see the ledger. I needed to know exactly how Liam was funding this legal assault. If I showed my hand now, they would close ranks. I had to play the part they had written for me. I had to be the intimidated daughter overwhelmed by the threat of a 10-year legal war. I let my shoulders drop slightly. I allowed my eyes to widen, feigning a deep, hesitant reluctance. I picked up the pen and turned it over in my fingers, pausing just long enough to let Patricia feel the thrill of an impending victory. I looked at the signature line, then back up at my mother. "I am willing to do what is best for the family," I said softly. "I just need to be sure this will not affect my employment status or my own tax liability. Give me 48 hours to have a local attorney review the waiver. If it clears, I will meet you and sign the release." Richard smiled, a patronizing curve of his lips that signaled he believed he had already won. "Of course, sweetheart. We can give you 2 days. Take your time to read it over. We will stay at the hotel downtown until you are ready." They turned and walked out of the firm, the glass doors swinging shut behind them. The brass bell chimed a cheerful exit. They thought they had cornered the utility child. They thought they had secured their millions. But the moment their rental car pulled out of the parking lot, I did not call a probate lawyer. I turned back to my dual monitors, cracked my knuckles, and opened the public court access portals for the state of New York. The hunt had begun. The heavy glass doors of the firm swung shut, sealing out the stifling South Carolina heat. The brass bell fell silent. For a long moment, the only sound in the reception area was the low, steady rush of the air conditioning vents. The scent of Patricia's expensive floral perfume lingered in the space, an unwelcome ghost of the last 20 minutes. I stood alone in the quiet office, my hands resting on the cool granite counter. My parents had walked out, believing they had won. They saw a 21-year-old girl in a cheap blazer, intimidated by high-priced lawyers and the threat of a grueling courtroom battle. They thought the 48-hour window I requested was just a delay tactic born of fear, a brief period for me to panic before folding to their demands. They were wrong. I picked up the leather binder and walked back to my desk. The dual monitors glowed, casting a pale blue light across the polished wood. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, slid my coffee cup to the side, and cracked the binder open again. I needed to dissect their strategy. Intimidation is usually a smokescreen designed to hide a weak position, and I intended to find the crack in their armor. I skipped past the initial waiver of rights and dug into the secondary documents tucked behind the stiff divider tabs. There it was, a proposed family settlement agreement. The Manhattan litigation firm had drafted a neat, tidy contract to avoid the very probate war they had just threatened me with. I traced my finger down the dense paragraphs of the settlement terms. The distribution structure was highly specific. If I signed away my rights as the executor and sole beneficiary, the estate would not be divided evenly among Vivian's surviving relatives. Instead, the agreement stipulated that 80% of the liquidated commercial real estate assets would be routed directly into a designated corporate holding account. The remaining 20% would go to my parents. I looked closely at the beneficiary listed for the 80% share. It was not Liam the individual, it was Apex Synergy LLC. Apex Synergy was Liam's much-publicized tech startup. For the past 3 years, my mother's social media feeds had been saturated with posts praising her visionary son and his revolutionary software company. There were photos of Liam cutting ribbons at networking events, standing in front of sleek rented office spaces, and boarding chartered flights. According to the family narrative, Apex Synergy was on the verge of a lucrative buyout. Yet here was a legally binding settlement agreement designed to funnel roughly $5.5 million of Vivian's money directly into the operating account of that very same company. I leaned back in my chair. The gears in my mind shifted, slipping into the cold, calculated rhythm of a forensic audit. A successful expanding tech company does not need an emergency cash injection laundered through a dead ant's probate settlement. A booming business seeks venture capital or issues equity. It does not send its founder's parents across the country to extort a younger sister. The settlement agreement was a distress signal disguised as a legal threat. Liam's company was starving for capital. I turned my attention to my monitors. The firm where I worked maintained premium subscriptions to legal and financial databases that the general public rarely accessed. I bypassed the standard search engines and logged directly into the New York Unified Court System portal. I needed to see exactly what Patricia and Richard had already filed in the surrogate court. My fingers moved rapidly across the mechanical keyboard. I entered Vivian's legal name and filtered the results by the current month. The docket populated almost instantly. Patricia was not bluffing about initiating the legal process. Her attorneys had filed a preliminary injunction that morning, seeking an emergency freeze on Vivian's trust accounts, pending a formal capacity challenge. I clicked on the PDF attachments associated with the injunction. Attorneys often make mistakes when they rush to secure an emergency order. They attach too many exhibits eager to prove to the judge that their clients have the standing and the financial fortitude to maintain the litigation. To secure a temporary restraining order on a $7 million estate, the court required my parents to post a surety bond. I scrolled through the digitized pages until I found the receipt for the bond premium. Attached to it was a wire transfer confirmation submitted by the Manhattan law firm to prove the funds had cleared their escrow account. I zoomed in on the wire transfer receipt. I scanned the originating details. I was looking for Richard and Patricia's joint banking information. Instead, I found a routing number tied to a commercial bank in Delaware. I read the name of the remitter listed on the wire. Apex Synergy, LLC. I sat perfectly still, staring at the pixelated text on the screen. The implications of that single line of data were profound. My parents were not paying the exorbitant legal retainers to attack me. Liam was paying the lawyers. He was using the corporate operating account of his tech startup to fund a personal vindictive probate battle on behalf of our parents. I closed my eyes for a brief second, recalling a summer afternoon, sitting at Vivian's kitchen table. The scent of rain on the lake had drifted through the open window while she taught me how to read a corporate ledger. Money always leaves a footprint. Claire, she had told me, tapping a red pen against a discrepancy in a sample tax return. People can lie with their words, their clothes, and their cars, but the numbers will always tell you who they really are. You just have to follow the footprint. I opened my eyes and looked back at the wire receipt. Liam was committing a severe breach of corporate governance. Commingling corporate funds with personal expenses is illegal. Using company cash to finance a family lawsuit is a textbook violation of fiduciary duty. If Apex Synergy had actual investors, board members, or legitimate stakeholders, Liam was embezzling from them to steal Vivian's estate. But what if he had no real investors? What if the venture capital was just another part of the curated illusion? The thread was loose. I grabbed the end of it, wrapping it tightly around my fist. The Manhattan lawyers thought they were dealing with a frightened 21-year-old. They did not realize they had handed a map of their client's vulnerabilities to a professional auditor. I minimized the court portal and opened a new encrypted search window. I navigated to the Delaware Division of Corporations database and ran a query on Apex Synergy. The screen loaded a list of filing histories, registered agents, and annual tax reports. I cross-referenced the corporate structure with Uniform Commercial Code filings, looking for any registered debts liens or collateral pledges tied to Liam's business. I was no longer defending myself against a probate dispute. I was preparing to dismantle the entire foundation of my family's wealth. If Liam was using corporate cash to fight me, I needed to know exactly where that corporate cash was coming from. And as I initiated the deep background check on his financial empire, I began to realize that the secrets hidden inside Apex Synergy were far more dangerous than a simple misused legal retainer. The air conditioning in the firm seemed to run louder as the afternoon stretched into evening. The partners had left hours ago, and the junior staff had filtered out by 6. I remained at my desk, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows across the empty bullpen. A cold metallic coffee sat abandoned near my keyboard. I had spent the last 4 hours tracking the digital footprint of a brother who had lived his entire life in the sun while I stayed hidden in the shade. Aunt Vivian's lessons were proving invaluable. She had trained me to look past the glossy exterior of a financial statement and dig into the structural integrity of the numbers. Liam had built a very convincing facade. From a distance, Apex Synergy looked like the tech startup every parent brags about. But as I pulled public filings, cross-referenced state registries, and parsed through Uniform Commercial Code records, the illusion rapidly began to deteriorate. I started with the revenue, or rather, the lack of it. I scoured industry databases and vendor contract registries, searching for any substantial verifiable income tied to Liam's software. There were minor consulting fees, a few beta testing contracts that paid pennies on the dollar, and a trickle of localized advertising revenue. It was not enough to keep the lights on in a co-working space, let alone fund the extravagant lifestyle my mother broadcasted to the world. The European vacations, the leased luxury vehicles, the expensive dinners, the aggressive legal retainers, none of it was supported by actual profit. Liam was running a ghost ship. The company was functionally insolvent. So how was he surviving? How was he affording Manhattan lawyers to fight a multi-million-dollar probate battle? I dug deeper into the UCC filings. A Uniform Commercial Code filing is a public notice that a creditor has a security interest in the personal property of a debtor. It is the footprint of leverage. I ran a comprehensive search on Liam's name and the corporate identity of Apex Synergy. The database returned a cluster of recent hits. The picture that emerged was a terrifying portrait of high-risk debt. Over the last 24 months, Liam had secured multiple commercial lines of credit from aggressive secondary-tier lenders. These were not the prime low-interest loans offered to stable businesses. These were the expensive high-yield loans handed out to desperate founders who needed cash to project success while they prayed for a miracle buyout. Liam had mortgaged everything: the intellectual property of the software, the office equipment, even the future accounts receivable. It was a massive house of cards built entirely on borrowed capital. If he missed a single payment, the lenders would trigger a default calling in the loans and seizing whatever assets remained. That explained the urgency to steal Vivian's trust. Liam needed $5 million to pay off his toxic debt and save himself from total financial ruin. But as I scrutinized the debt structure, the cold logic of the audit hit a major snag. Secondary-tier lenders are aggressive, but they are not stupid. They require heavy collateral. More importantly, they require a solid, unshakable personal guarantee from the founder. They want to ensure that if the business collapses, they can legally seize the personal assets of the person who signed the dotted line. Liam's personal finances were a mess. He owned no significant real estate in his own name, he carried massive credit card debt, and his liquid cash was tied up in the failing startup. His credit profile would have been heavily flagged by any competent underwriter. There was absolutely no way a bank, even a desperate one, would have approved nearly $500,000 in commercial lines of credit based solely on Liam's signature. They needed a stronger guarantor. They needed someone with a pristine credit history, zero debt-to-income ratio, and a flawless payment record. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A terrible, quiet suspicion began to take root in the back of my mind. It was a thought so invasive, so completely violating, that I almost pushed it away. But I am an auditor. I do not deal in hope. I deal in evidence. I opened a new secure tab. I bypassed the standard consumer credit monitoring apps, the ones that show you a simplified, colorful dashboard of your financial health. I logged directly into the raw data portals for the major credit bureaus using the elevated access credentials granted to forensic investigators. I typed in my own name. I entered my date of birth. I carefully typed in my social security number, the 9 digits I had guarded fiercely since I left home. The screen loaded. The raw, unfiltered data of my financial identity populated the screen. I scrolled past my legitimate, modest credit card. I scrolled past my small, perfectly managed auto loan, and then I stopped breathing. The data sat there in stark black and white text. My pristine financial history had been hijacked. Listed directly under my name were 2 substantial commercial lines of credit originating from a regional bank in Ohio. Below those was a massive 6-figure federal loan backed by the Small Business Administration. The total debt burden tied to my Social Security number was staggering, nearly $500,000. I clicked on the origination details for the SBA loan. The documents loaded slowly. I scanned the borrower information. Apex Synergy, LLC. I moved my eyes to the section requiring a personal guarantor. I looked at the digital signature stamped and verified 3 years ago, right around the time I was quietly packing my bags to leave for Charleston. The signature was mine, or rather, a perfect digital forgery of mine. The betrayal layered itself over me like a suffocating blanket. It wasn't just that they sent me away every summer. It wasn't just that they excluded me from the family narrative. They had stolen my identity. They had taken the pristine, untouched credit history of their invisible daughter and used it as collateral to prop up the failing empire of their golden son. Because they had been making the minimum monthly payments on time, the fraud had remained entirely undetected. My credit score appeared artificially inflated by the massive aged accounts. I had never received a late notice. I had never received a collection call. They had kept the loans current just enough to avoid triggering an alert utilizing my identity as a silent, unpaid cosigner. The true nature of the legal ambush in my office suddenly locked into place. The threat was not just about tying up Vivian's estate in probate court. It was far more insidious. If I refused to sign the waiver, if I fought them for the $7 million, Liam would simply stop making the minimum payments on the loans attached to my name. He would deliberately default. The banks would call the debt, and when Liam could not pay, they would come after the guarantor, me. My credit score would be obliterated. I would be flagged for massive commercial default. My eligibility to sit for the CPA exam would be permanently revoked. The forensic accounting firm would terminate my employment the moment a background check revealed $500,000 in defaulted federal loans. They were not just trying to steal a dead woman's wealth. They were holding my entire career, my entire future hostage. Sign away the inheritance, or they would financially execute me. I sat back in my chair. The office was completely silent. They expected me to fold. They expected the quiet, compliant girl to panic when faced with the destruction of her life. I picked up my cold coffee and took a slow sip. I did not panic. I opened a new browser tab and typed in the web address for the Internal Revenue Service. The harsh glow of this monitor reflected in the dark window of my office. Outside, the Charleston night was thick and still. Inside, I was staring at the architectural blueprints of my own financial ruin. Nearly $500,000 in fraudulent debt, all secured by a forged signature on a federal loan application quietly ticking away under my name. My parents and my brother had weaponized my identity. They had constructed a scenario where they held total leverage. They believed they had me trapped in an impossible choice. Either I signed away Aunt Vivian's entire $7 million estate to fund Liam's failing tech company, or Liam would intentionally default on the SBA loans. The default would trigger a catastrophic collapse of my credit, guaranteeing my termination from the accounting firm and permanently barring me from becoming a licensed CPA. They expected me to choose my career over the inheritance. They expected the utility child to sacrifice the windfall to protect the modest, quiet life she had built. They assumed my reaction would be fear followed closely by compliance. They fundamentally misunderstood what happens when you train a child to be invisible. You teach them how to observe without being seen. You teach them how to dismantle systems quietly from the inside out. I did not reach for my phone to call them and beg. I did not draft an angry email demanding an explanation. Confrontation without a tactical advantage is just an emotional release, and I had no interest in letting them see me bleed. Instead, I opened the official portal for the Internal Revenue Service. I spent the next 3 hours mapping the exact parameters of their crime. Securing a federal Small Business Administration loan using a stolen identity is not a simple civil matter. It is a severe federal offense. It triggers a cascade of violations: wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. But to deploy this information effectively, I needed to ensure the blast radius was tightly controlled. If I simply went to the local police, Liam might have time to scramble hide assets or attempt to frame me as a willing participant. I needed a weapon that struck instantly and lethally, bypassing local jurisdictions and striking directly at the core of his corporate structure. While I navigated the complex reporting protocols on the IRS website, my cell phone vibrated on the desk. The caller ID flashed a number I had not seen in 3 years, but one I immediately recognized: Liam. I let it ring 3 times, controlling my breathing, forcing my heart rate into a slow, steady rhythm. I picked up the phone and accepted the call. Hello. I kept my voice hesitant, pitching it slightly higher, playing the role of the overwhelmed younger sister they expected to hear. Claire. Liam's voice drifted through the speaker, dripping with the arrogant, smooth cadence of a man who believed he was holding all the cards. He sounded exactly like the polished tech founder my mother constantly bragged about. Look, I know Mom and Dad coming down there was a lot to process. I wanted to reach out founder to junior auditor, man to man, so to speak. I remained silent, letting him fill the space. They are just trying to keep the family ecosystem stable. Liam continued, adopting a tone of faux paternal concern. Vivian wasn't thinking straight. You know that. We just need to correct the paperwork. Sign the waiver by Friday, Claire. Chloe and I are closing on a summer house in Aspen next week, and I honestly do not have the bandwidth to fly down to South Carolina and babysit you through this probate mess. I was pushing the deadline. Friday. He wanted the estate liquidated and the funds transferred before his fraudulent commercial loans required their next massive minimum payment. I stared at the IRS reporting form on my screen. I needed him to confirm the scope of his arrogance on the record. South Carolina is a one-party consent state. I reached out and tapped the record button on my desk phone, linking it to the active cellular call. "Aspen is expensive, Liam," I said, allowing a tremor of manufactured anxiety to slip into my voice. "Are you sure Apex Synergy can handle that kind of overhead right now? I mean, with the probate costs and everything?" Liam laughed. It was a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed through the quiet office. It was the laugh of a man who genuinely believed he was untouchable. "Apex is fine, Claire. You don't need to worry your little head about corporate overhead. We are securing another round of federal grants next week. The liquidity is there. We just need the trust resolved to balance the initial capital outlay. We are untouchable right now." I froze the mouse hovering over the submit button on my screen. He had just admitted it, willingly, casually, and on a recorded line. He wasn't just relying on the initial fraudulent SBA loan. He was actively planning to apply for a second round of federal funding. He was going to defraud the United States government again, utilizing the exact same stolen identity architecture he had already established. He had handed me the final piece of the puzzle. "Okay, Liam," I said, my voice flattening out, stripping away the anxious tremor. "I understand. I just need a little more time to review the waiver. Don't overthink it, Claire. Just sign the paperwork. Do the mature thing." He disconnected the call without saying goodbye. I lowered the phone and stopped the recording. I saved the audio file to an encrypted external drive. Liam thought he was securing his Aspen vacation home. He thought he was intimidating his little sister into surrendering a $7 million real estate portfolio. He did not realize he had just provided a federal investigator with a recorded confession of an ongoing criminal conspiracy to defraud the Small Business Administration. I turned my attention back to the IRS portal. The form on the screen was not a standard identity theft report. I was not filing a complaint as a victim. I was filing IRS Form 211, the whistleblower claim. I began to type, my fingers moving with the precise, ruthless efficiency Vivian had taught me. I detailed the forged signature on the initial SBA loan. I provided the loan origination numbers, the routing information for Apex Synergy's corporate accounts, and the dates of the minimum payments designed to mask the fraud. I attached the audio recording of Liam confessing his intent to secure a second round of fraudulent federal grants. I built a comprehensive forensic dossier that handed the IRS and the FBI a fully investigated, neatly packaged federal indictment. I clicked submit. The confirmation screen flashed, assigning me a whistleblower claim number. I wrote the number down on a yellow sticky note and attached it to the bottom of my monitor. The trap was set. The federal government was now quietly moving into position. I did not need to fight my parents in probate court. I did not need to hire my own expensive litigators to defend Vivian's trust. I just needed to deliver the news. I picked up my phone and drafted a text message to my mother. "I am ready to make this right for the family. I am flying to Chicago. I will meet you at your attorney's office on Friday morning." Patricia replied less than a minute later. "I knew you would do the right thing, sweetheart. See you Friday." I locked my computer, grabbed my blazer, and walked out of the firm. The humid Charleston air wrapped around me as I stepped into the dark parking lot. They were expecting a compliant, broken girl to show up and sign her life away. They were going to get an auditor who had just balanced the ledger. The flight from Charleston to Chicago was smooth, a quiet 2 hours suspended above the clouds. I spent the time reviewing the forensic dossier I had compiled. 4 identical navy blue manila folders sat securely in my carry-on tote. Inside each folder was a localized explosion waiting to happen. The spreadsheets, the IP logs, the forged origination documents, and the asset forfeiture guidelines. I had not slept more than 3 hours in the last 2 days, but I felt no fatigue. I felt a sharp, dangerous clarity. I landed at O'Hare, bypassed the baggage claim, and caught a ride straight into the heart of the city. The law firm representing my parents was located in a sleek, glass-paneled high-rise downtown. It was the kind of building designed to project absolute authority and limitless resources. The lobby smelled of expensive leather and polished stone. I gave my name to the security desk, and they directed me to the 42nd floor. The elevator ride was silent. I watched the numbers climb each floor, taking me further away from the quiet life I had built and closer to the family that had tried to destroy it. When the polished steel doors slid open, a receptionist directed me down a long hallway lined with abstract art. She gestured toward heavy double oak doors at the end of the corridor. I pushed the doors open and walked into the boardroom. The room was vast, dominated by a massive mahogany table. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. Patricia, Richard, Liam, and his wife Chloe were already seated along one side of the table. They looked like a curated advertisement for generational wealth. Patricia wore a tailored cream suit, her posture relaxed and victorious. Richard was leaning back in his leather chair, chatting casually with an older, silver-haired man I assumed was their lead attorney. Liam was scrolling on his phone, entirely unbothered by the gravity of a multi-million-dollar probate dispute. Chloe sat next to him, admiring her reflection in the dark screen of her tablet, a massive diamond engagement ring catching the sunlight. They radiated arrogant triumph. They believed the hard part was over. The silver-haired attorney stood up as I approached the table. He offered a polite professional smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Claire, I am Mr. Sterling. Thank you for making the trip up here," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them. "I have prepared the deed transfer and the probate waiver." He slid a stack of heavy watermarked paper across the polished mahogany. The documents came to rest directly in front of me. A gold-trimmed pen sat neatly on top of the pile. "Just initial the bottom of the first page and sign the second," Sterling instructed smoothly. "Once you execute the waiver, we can file the withdrawal with the surrogate court, and we can all move forward." Patricia leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. She swirled the dark coffee in her porcelain cup. "You are doing the mature thing, sweetheart. Family supports family. We knew you would see reason once you had time to think it over." I looked at the documents. I looked at the gold pen. I did not reach for it. I let the silence stretch. I let it hold for 5 seconds, then 10. The casual atmosphere in the room began to fracture. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. Richard sat up a little straighter. Liam finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Before I sign away $3 million in commercial real estate," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying clearly across the large room. "I just have one question for you, Liam." Liam sighed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest. "Let us not drag this out, Claire. What is the question?" I kept my eyes locked on his. "Are the federal SBA loans attached to Apex Synergy going to be paid off using Vivian's trust, or are you going to continue letting them default under my Social Security number?" The boardroom went dead silent. It was not a gradual quiet. It was an instant suffocating vacuum. The ambient noise of the city outside seemed to vanish. Liam's head snapped back as if he had been physically struck. The casual irritation vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden stark terror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Patricia's polite, victorious smile froze. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin an unnatural ashen gray. She looked from me to Liam, her eyes wide with a sudden panicked confusion. She knew her son was struggling financially, but the phrase federal SBA loans and the mention of my Social Security number clearly did not fit into the narrative Liam had sold her. Mr. Sterling froze his hand, hovering over his own legal pad. He was a veteran litigator. He knew exactly what a federal loan default implied, and he knew instantly that his clients were hiding a massive liability. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking, the authoritative tone completely shattered. What loans? I did not wait for their excuses. I did not wait for Liam to attempt a desperate, clumsy lie. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the 4 identical navy blue manila folders. I slid the first one across the table to Mr. Sterling. I handed the second to Liam. I pushed the third toward my parents, and I placed the final folder directly in front of Chloe. "I am an auditor." I announced, the clinical, precise tone of my profession taking over. "I do not sign documents I have not reconciled." Mr. Sterling opened his folder first. I watched the veteran attorney process the information. His eyes darted across the highlighted spreadsheets. He turned the page and stared at the IP logs I had mapped, tying the fraudulent loan applications directly to the router in my parents' home. He flipped to the final document in his packet, the wire transfer receipt, showing the movement of funds from the SBA loan directly into his own firm's escrow account. The blood rushed to Sterling's face. The professional composure he had maintained just moments ago evaporated, replaced by profound, absolute horror. He dropped the folder onto the table and looked at Liam. His voice trembled with a mixture of rage and professional panic. Liam Sterling choked out the word, barely escaping his throat. "Did you use this firm's escrow account to launder federal grant money?" The conflict was no longer between me and my family. The conflict had just detonated from inside their own ranks. The legal shield my parents had purchased to intimidate me had just realized it was being used as a tool for federal wire fraud. Liam could not answer. He was staring at the forged signature on the loan origination document in his folder, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw breath. The golden child was realizing in real time that the invisible sister had just locked all the doors and set the building on fire. The silence in the boardroom fractured into absolute chaos. Mr. Sterling's accusation hung in the air, a devastating realization that the high-priced legal maneuvering was financed by stolen federal funds. Before Liam could even attempt to stammer out a defense to his attorney, Chloe opened her folder. I had curated Chloe's packet with a specific, ruthless intention. She was not a primary architect of the fraud, but she was its most visible beneficiary. She wore the clothes, drove the cars, and posted the curated lifestyle that Liam's stolen money subsidized. Chloe flipped past the initial spreadsheets. Her manicured fingernails stopped on a printout of the Federal Asset Forfeiture Guidelines. I had highlighted the specific statutes regarding property acquired through wire fraud. "What is this?" Chloe demanded, her voice shrill, the carefully maintained elegance cracking instantly. She looked at Liam, then shoved the paper toward him. "Liam, why is my name highlighted next to a $150,000 federal wire fraud charge?" "Because Chloe." I answered calmly, drawing her attention back to me. "Liam bought your new Range Rover and the down payment for the Aspen house using funds he acquired by stealing my identity." Chloe stared at me, uncomprehending for a split second before the reality of the statement landed. "Which means," I continued, my voice steady, cutting through the rising panic in the room, "under federal forfeiture laws, you do not own a car. You do not own a house. You are driving around in stolen government property. And when the federal marshals execute the seizure warrants, they will not ask politely for the keys. They will tow the vehicle out of your driveway, and they will freeze your personal accounts to claw back the down payment." Chloe dropped the papers as if they were physically burning her hands. She turned on Liam, her eyes wide with a terrifying, absolute rage. The facade of the supportive tech founder's wife disintegrated in a heartbeat. "You lied to me," she screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the boardroom. "You told me the Series A funding came through. You told me we were liquid. You used her identity. Are you out of your mind?" Liam flinched, shrinking back into his heavy leather chair. "Chloe, please, just calm down. I can fix this. We just need to liquidate the trust." The bridge loan was just temporary. He was still trying to sell the illusion. He was still trying to manage the narrative, even as the spreadsheet sitting in front of him proved the narrative was a federal crime. Richard slammed his hand down on the mahogany table. The sudden violence of the movement rattled the coffee cups. He stood up, his face flushed a dark, angry red. He pointed a trembling finger directly at me. "You delete these files right now," Claire, Richard bellowed, attempting to reassert the patriarchal authority he had wielded my entire life. "You are destroying your brother's life over a misunderstanding. We were going to pay the loans back once the estate settled. You are tearing this family apart." The audacity of his outrage was breathtaking. He was not angry that his son had committed a felony. He was not angry that my future had been placed on the chopping block. He was enraged that the utility child had dared to pull the receipts and expose the golden son. He expected me to cower. He expected the volume of his voice to force my compliance. I leaned back in my chair. I did not raise my voice to match his. I did not flinch. "I cannot delete them, Dad," I said. Patricia gasped, clutching the collar of her expensive cream suit, as if she were trying to hold herself together. "What do you mean you cannot delete them, Claire, please? You have to fix this. You cannot do this to your brother." I looked at my mother, watching the desperation warp her features. I felt no pity. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a perfectly balanced equation. "I cannot delete them, Mom, because they are already in the possession of the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Patricia let out a ragged, choking sound. She slumped back into her chair, pressing both hands over her mouth. "You called the police on your own blood," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror. She looked at me as if I were a monster, as if the act of reporting the fraud was somehow a greater crime than the fraud itself. This was the moment. This was the unexpected payoff I had carefully orchestrated over the last 48 hours. I did not just call the police, Mom. I filed IRS Form 211. I turned my gaze to Liam. He had stopped trying to calm Chloe down. He was staring at me, his face completely devoid of color, understanding dawning in his eyes. "For those of you who are not in finance," I said, addressing the room but keeping my eyes locked on Liam, "that is the IRS whistleblower program. When the federal government investigates a substantial fraud, they do not just prosecute the offender. They incentivize the reporting. When the government recovers the $500,000 Liam stole from the Small Business Administration, they pay the whistleblower a bounty. The payout is between 15 and 30% of the recovered funds." I allowed a genuine, unforced smile to touch my lips. "By trying to extort Vivian's estate, you did not just expose your own federal crimes. You actively financed the launch of my own accounting firm. You are going to pay me for the privilege of reporting you." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of complete structural collapse. Liam realized that he had not just been caught, he had been monetized. His arrogance, his desperate need to maintain an illusion of wealth, had provided the exact leverage I needed to guarantee my own financial independence. The ghost they had created had not just locked the doors, she had billed them for the lock. The revelation of the IRS whistleblower filing hung over the boardroom, a crushing weight that pinned my family to their chairs. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ragged, shallow breathing of my mother. They had walked into the law firm expecting a quick capitulation. They had expected to bully the invisible daughter into handing over $7 million to fund the golden child's illusion. Instead, they were staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, and I had just handed them the invoice for their own destruction. Mr. Sterling was the first to break the paralysis. The veteran litigator moved with sudden, frantic energy. He stood up so quickly that his heavy leather chair slammed into the credenza behind him. He did not look at my parents. He did not look at me. He looked exclusively at Liam, and his expression was a mask of professional terror and absolute fury. "This meeting is over," Sterling declared. His voice shook, stripping away the polished, intimidating veneer he had projected 20 minutes earlier. Richard tried to intervene, raising a hand in a desperate plea. "Now hold on, Art. We can figure this out. We can structure a repayment plan. We just need to keep this out of the courts." Sterling turned his furious gaze on my father. "Do not speak to me, Richard. Do not say another word in this room." The attorney reached down and snapped his legal folder shut. He scooped up the fraudulent wire transfer receipt I had provided. "I am formally withdrawing as your counsel, effective immediately. As of this exact second, this firm no longer represents you, Liam, or Apex Synergy." Patricia let out a sharp, panicked sob. "You cannot just leave us. We paid your retainer. We need you to fix this." Sterling leaned over the mahogany table, his silver hair catching the sunlight, his eyes burning with outrage. "You paid my retainer with stolen federal funds, Patricia. Your son used my firm's escrow account to launder money he acquired through wire fraud and identity theft. You have not just jeopardized your own family. You have implicated my practice in a federal crime." He straightened up, adjusting his suit jacket with trembling hands. "If any of you contact this firm again, I will have security escort you out. I am legally obligated to report the misuse of my escrow account to the State Bar Association, and I will be cooperating fully with any federal subpoenas regarding this matter." Sterling looked at me. For a brief second, the anger in his eyes faded, replaced by a mixture of profound shock and reluctant respect. He realized that the 21-year-old junior auditor sitting across from him had outmaneuvered a team of Manhattan litigators without breaking a sweat. He gave me a curt, tight nod, turned on his heel, and stormed out of his own boardroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind him, the sound echoing like a gavel striking a sounding block. Without their legal shield, my parents were entirely exposed. The illusion of authority they had commanded simply evaporated. The room devolved into absolute terrifying chaos. Patricia began weeping hysterically. The carefully maintained composure she had carried for decades shattered completely. She slumped forward onto the polished table, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. "Claire, please," she sobbed, the sound muffled by her palms. "You have to call them back. Call the IRS. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them Liam had your permission. You cannot send your brother to prison." Richard ignored his wife's breakdown. He lunged toward my side of the table, his face a mask of desperate, unhinged aggression. He slammed his fist onto the wood, pointing at the probate waiver sitting untouched in front of me. "Sign the waiver," Richard bellowed, spit flying from his lips. "Sign the damn paper right now, Claire. If you sign over the estate, we can liquidate the commercial properties. We can use Vivian's money to pay off the SBA loans before the feds finalize the audit. We can hire a criminal defense attorney for Liam. You are going to fix this. You owe this family." I looked up at my father. He was sweating, his chest heaving, demanding that I surrender a $7 million inheritance to save the son who had just tried to destroy my life. The entitlement was so deeply ingrained in him that he genuinely believed I was obligated to sacrifice myself for Liam's salvation. But the power dynamic had permanently inverted. He was screaming at a ghost, and the ghost was no longer afraid of the noise. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. I kept my voice incredibly soft, forcing him to stop yelling just to hear me. "I do not owe this family anything, Dad," I said, "and even if I wanted to, I cannot sign that waiver." Richard stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Why not?" "Because the moment I filed the whistleblower report with the IRS and the Inspector General, I triggered a federal freeze on all assets connected to Apex Synergy and its principals." I explained, speaking slowly, ensuring he understood the absolute finality of the situation. "The state surrogate court will not process a probate transfer to a corporate entity that is currently the subject of an active federal fraud investigation. Even if I signed that paper right now, the court would reject it. The money is locked, Dad. Vivian's estate is entirely out of your reach." Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, as the reality of his powerlessness finally sank in. He had no leverage, he had no lawyers, he had no access to the capital he desperately needed. The trap they had built for me had sprung backward, catching them entirely by surprise. The crushing reality of the federal freeze settled over the boardroom. Richard stumbled backward, sinking into his chair, as if the strength had been abruptly drained from his legs. Patricia continued to weep into her hands, the sound a low, steady drone of defeat. I shifted my gaze down the length of the mahogany table past my broken parents and focused on the golden child. Liam was sitting completely frozen. His expensive tailored suit suddenly looked too large for him. The arrogant, untouchable tech founder had vanished, replaced by a terrified man realizing the absolute certainty of his impending ruin. He was staring blankly at the wall, his mind clearly struggling to process the speed at which his entire life had just been dismantled. But Chloe was not paralyzed. Chloe did not weep. She was far too ruthless, far too pragmatic for tears. She was a woman who had married an illusion, and she was watching the illusion burn to the ground. She looked at Liam, her eyes narrowing with a cold, calculating assessment. She was running her own rapid audit of the situation, determining her exact exposure and her optimal exit strategy. "Liam," Chloe said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth or panic. It was the tone of a surgeon declaring a patient dead on the table. Liam blinked, pulling his gaze away from the wall. He looked at his wife, a desperate, pleading expression on his face. "Chloe, listen to me. I can call my investors. I can pull some strings. We just need to weather this." "You do not have any investors." "Liam," she replied, her words sharp and precise. "You do not have strings to pull. You stole your sister's identity to secure government loans, and you used the money to buy my car and put a down payment on a house in Aspen. A house that federal marshals are going to seize because it was purchased with laundered funds." Chloe stood up. She did not look at my parents. She did not look at me. She focused entirely on the man who had just destroyed her carefully curated life. "You made me an accessory to federal wire fraud," she stated. "You exposed me to asset forfeiture. I am not going down with you." She reached for her left hand. Slowly, deliberately, she slid the massive 5-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. The ring that Patricia had bragged about to her country club friends. The ring that I now knew was financed by the very loans slowly destroying my credit score. Chloe placed the ring precisely in the center of the dark mahogany table. The diamond caught the sunlight, a hard, bright spark against the wood. "I am calling my divorce attorney the moment I step into the elevator," she said, picking up her designer handbag. "Do not come back to the house, Liam. Do not call my phone. My lawyers will handle all further communication." Liam lunged forward, reaching across the table, his hand grasping empty air. "Chloe, wait. You cannot just walk out. We are a team." Chloe did not pause. She did not look back. She turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind her. The sound echoed in the silent room, finalizing the departure of the last piece of Liam's fabricated empire. The golden child was completely alone. He stared at the diamond ring sitting in the center of the table. His shoulders slumped, the arrogant posture finally breaking. The reality of his situation was unavoidable. He was losing his wife. He had lost his lawyers. He had lost the business. He was looking at years in a federal correctional facility, and there was absolutely no one left to bail him out. Slowly, Liam turned his head and looked at me. The sneering, dismissive older brother was gone. He looked small, terrified, and incredibly fragile. His eyes were wide, pleading for a mercy he had never once offered me. "Claire, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. The sound was pathetic, a desperate whine that made my skin crawl. "Please, I am your brother. They are going to put me in prison. You have to stop this. You know how to work the system. Tell them you authorized the loans. Tell them we had an agreement. I will pay you back. I swear to God I will pay you back every cent." He reached a shaking hand across the table, extending it toward the sister, who had always quietly accepted her role at the bottom of the family hierarchy. He expected the ingrained conditioning to kick in. He expected the utility child to sacrifice her integrity, her career, and her freedom to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the tears welling in his eyes. I felt absolutely nothing. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. I reached down and buttoned my blazer. I picked up my empty leather tote bag and slung it over my shoulder. "You spent my entire childhood sending me away so you could live a luxury life, Liam," I said, my voice cold and steady. "And you spent my adulthood stealing my identity to keep that life going." I looked at my parents. Patricia was staring at me. Her makeup ruined her face, a mask of grief and disbelief. Richard was staring at the floor, a defeated, broken man. "You are not going to prison because of me, Liam." I continued, my gaze moving back to my brother. "You are going to prison because you could not do the math. You built a house of cards on a foundation you did not own." I paused, letting the finality of the moment settle over the room. I looked at Patricia, remembering the exact tone she used every June when she dropped me off at Vivian's house. "Strong kids do not make a fuss, remember?" I echoed my mother's favorite toxic mantra right back at her. Patricia wailed a high, piercing sound of pure agony, burying her face back into her hands. I did not wait to hear the rest of their excuses. I did not wait for Richard to beg, or for Liam to start crying in earnest. I turned my back on them and walked out of the boardroom. I stepped into the elevator, hit the button for the lobby, and watched the doors slide shut. I left my parents and their golden child sitting in the ruins of the avalanche they had built with their own hands. The audit was complete. The ledger was closed. The polished steel doors of the elevator slid shut, sealing me inside a quiet, descending box. The digital floor indicator ticked downward, a steady countdown taking me away from the wreckage I had just engineered. I leaned against the mirrored back wall and exhaled. For the first time in 48 hours, I allowed my shoulders to drop. I expected an adrenaline crash, a sudden onset of shaking hands or a racing heart. Instead, I felt a profound, untethered stillness. The utility child was dead. The invisible sister had burned the script. The lobby doors opened, and I walked out into the Chicago afternoon. The city was loud, bathed in bright sunlight and the relentless rhythm of traffic. Pedestrians brushed past me holding briefcases and coffee cups, entirely unaware that 40 stories above them, a curated dynasty was actively disintegrating. I raised a hand, hailed a passing cab, and gave the driver the instructions for the airport. As the taxi merged onto the expressway, the leather tote bag sitting on the seat beside me began to vibrate. It was a persistent, rhythmic buzzing. The fallout was beginning. I did not reach for the phone. I watched the cityscape blur past the tinted window, tracing the sharp lines of the architecture against the sky. Let them panic. Let them scramble for a foothold that no longer existed. I paid the driver, navigated the security checkpoints, and found a quiet corner in a departure lounge near my gate. Only then did I unzip the tote and pull out my device. The screen was cluttered with notifications. 11 missed calls, 7 text messages, 4 voicemails. I ordered a black coffee from a passing server, set my phone flat on the table, and tapped the icon for the first voicemail. I pressed the speaker to my ear. Richard's voice filled the receiver. The authoritative bellow he had used in the boardroom was gone, replaced by a tight-clipped cadence. He was trying to sound like a man negotiating a tough merger, attempting to assert a dominance he had permanently lost. "Claire, pick up the phone. This has gone far enough. We need to sit down like rational adults and mediate this situation. We can draw up a new contract. You can take the majority of Vivian's trust. We just need you to call the federal investigators and retract the report. Tell them you authorized Liam to use your credentials. We will draft a promissory note. He will pay you back. Do not throw away your family over a financial misunderstanding." I deleted the message. My father still believed he was haggling over a real estate deal. He did not grasp the fundamental mechanics of federal law. You cannot simply call the Internal Revenue Service or the Inspector General and ask them to ignore $500,000 in fraudulent government loans. A whistleblower report is a one-way valve. Once the evidence is submitted, the federal machine takes over. The investigation was out of my hands, and no amount of backroom mediation was going to stop a grand jury from reviewing the IP logs and the forged signatures. I played the second voicemail. Patricia was weeping. It was not the performative, delicate crying she used to elicit sympathy at country club luncheons. It was the raw, ugly sound of a woman watching her golden idol shatter. "Sweetheart, please," she sobbed, her voice catching in her throat. "You have to answer me. Liam is your brother. He made a mistake. He was under so much pressure to succeed. We will give you the estate. You can have all the properties. We will not contest the will. Just please call them off. You are destroying his life. He is going to lose Chloe. He is going to lose everything. Save him, Claire. Please." I lowered the phone and took a slow sip of the dark coffee. The irony of her plea was a bitter, fascinating thing to dissect. She was offering me the very inheritance that rightfully belonged to me, acting as if she still held the power to bestow it. She thought Vivian's wealth was a bargaining chip she could trade for Liam's freedom. She failed to realize the federal freeze had already locked the board. The probate court would not allow her to contest or concede anything, while the estate was tethered to a criminal probe. More importantly, she was still casting me in the role of the savior. She wanted the quiet daughter to step in and absorb the damage. She wanted me to perjure myself to claim I had authorized the identity theft, risking my own freedom and my professional license to spare Liam the consequences of his felony. Even now, standing in the ashes of their own greed, her primary concern was shielding the son who had architected the fire. I deleted the second voicemail, cleared the missed call notifications, and turned the device on silent. The boarding call for my flight echoed through the terminal. I gathered my bag and walked toward the gate. The transition from the sharp, frantic energy of Chicago back to the heavy, languid air of South Carolina felt like stepping through a portal into a different reality. I took my seat by the window. The jet engines roared to life, pushing the aircraft down the runway and lifting us into the sky. I looked down at the shrinking grid of the city, feeling the last lingering threads of my childhood sever and drift away. When I finally unlocked the door to my apartment in Charleston later that evening, the quiet sanctuary of the space washed over me. It was a modest living area, furnished with simple, clean lines paid for entirely by my own legitimate labor. There were no leased luxury vehicles in the driveway. There were no fraudulent credit accounts keeping the lights on. It was a solvent, honest life, and it belonged exclusively to me. I set my keys on the counter and opened my laptop. The weekend was beginning, which meant Liam was trapped in a terrifying holding pattern. Federal agencies do not typically execute search warrants or freeze accounts on a Saturday. He had 48 hours to sit in his rented office, staring at the walls, knowing the hammer was poised to strike. He was likely scrambling to find a white-collar criminal defense attorney, only to discover that top-tier firms demand six-figure retainers paid up front in cleared funds. Funds he no longer possessed. I logged into my secure work portal and prepared my final documentation for the upcoming week. Monday morning would bring a new phase of the operation. I needed to be ready to coordinate with the local field office of the Inspector General should they require verification of the digital evidence I had submitted. I arranged the audio recording of Liam's confession, ensuring the metadata and timestamps were preserved for the evidentiary chain of custody. I did not feel vindictive. I did not feel the fiery, chaotic rush of revenge. I operated with the cool, deliberate precision Vivian had instilled in me. A ledger out of balance must be corrected. A stolen asset must be recovered. The people who had treated my identity as a disposable commodity were about to experience the full, unyielding weight of the accountability they had spent their entire lives evading. I closed the laptop, walked into the kitchen, and poured a glass of cold water, ready to watch the week unfold. Monday morning arrived with the stifling heat typical of South Carolina in the late summer. I walked into my accounting firm just before 8, holding a plain iced coffee, and settled into my chair. The office around me hummed with the ordinary sounds of the work week. Keyboards clattered, junior partners discussed tax codes by the water cooler, and the printer in the hallway ran a continuous rhythmic cycle. It was a picture of mundane professional stability. 1,000 miles away in Chicago, the reality I had engineered was about to shatter my brother's life. I logged into my dual monitors and opened the encrypted drive holding the Apex Synergy audit. I did not have a scheduled task for this file. I simply wanted it ready. When you file an IRS Form 211 involving high-level wire fraud and federal loan theft, the government does not send a polite letter asking for an interview. They coordinate a multi-agency strike. I expected a phone call at some point during the week to verify my digital submissions. The call came at exactly 9:15. The direct line on my desk, a number reserved strictly for external agency coordination, rang twice. I checked the caller identification display. It showed a restricted federal exchange. I picked up the receiver and stated my name. Claire, a deep, measured voice responded. "This is Special Agent David Thomas with the Small Business Administration Office of the Inspector General. I am calling to verify the whistleblower claim number you generated on Thursday evening." I recited the alphanumeric string I had written on the yellow sticky note attached to my monitor. Verified Agent Thomas said, his tone shifting into rapid operational focus. "I am currently standing inside the leased commercial workspace of Apex Synergy in downtown Chicago. We are executing a federal search warrant in coordination with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. But we have a situation, and I need to know the exact depth of the forward, my pulse quickening." "What kind of situation?" "The office is empty," Thomas explained. "The physical files are gone. The localized server racks have been wiped with a commercial degausser. Your brother panicked. He did not wait out the weekend. He tried to burn the evidence, and now he is attempting to run." I stared at the screen. Liam had always been arrogant, but I never took him for a flight risk. The golden child was too attached to his luxury lifestyle to vanish into the shadows. "Customs and Border Protection just flagged his passport," Thomas continued. "He is sitting in the International Departure Lounge at O'Hare. He is booked on a direct flight to Dubai, which does not have a standing extradition treaty for this specific class of financial crime. Our agents are moving through the terminal now to detain him. But there is a secondary issue. I waited, letting the agent lay out the parameters of the crisis. When we initiated the federal freeze on Friday night, we locked down the primary operating accounts for Apex Synergy and his personal checking accounts," Thomas said. "But Liam is currently trying to initiate a 7-figure wire transfer from a mobile banking application. He is trying to push the funds into an offshore correspondent bank before we put him in handcuffs. We cannot intercept the wire because the routing number does not match any of the corporate identities listed in your original whistleblower disclosure." "Did your audit uncover a shadow account, a holding company he might be using as a reserve contingency fund?" My mind raced. I had mapped the flow of the stolen SBA funds into Apex Synergy and then traced the outbound payments to Chloe's car and the Aspen down payment. I had assumed his remaining liquidity was housed within the primary corporate shell. I had underestimated his capacity for structural deceit. "Give me 2 minutes," I said, shifting my phone to my shoulder and placing both hands on the keyboard. I opened the raw CSV files containing the historical ledgers I had pulled from my parents' bank accounts and the public corporate filings. I needed to find a leak. I needed to spot the invisible door Liam had built to siphon the cash out of Apex Synergy before the federal freeze hit. I ran a rapid algorithmic sort on the outgoing vendor payments listed in Liam's public expenditure reports. I bypassed the large, obvious transactions. Fraudsters rarely move their contingency funds in massive single blocks. They drip the money out through a process called smurfing, utilizing fractional discrepancies and inflated invoices paid to phantom contractors. I set the software to highlight recurring payments made on the 15th of every month that ended in odd, non-rounded digits. A legitimate software company pays standard, predictable rates for server hosting, marketing, and payroll. They do not pay fluctuating, highly specific amounts for vague consulting services. The screen flashed. A pattern emerged from the static data. Over the last 14 months, Apex Synergy had authorized 42 separate payments to a vendor listed as Blue Horizon Ventures. The payment memos described the transactions as strategic market analysis. The amounts varied wildly, but they always cleared through a regional credit union that specialized in expedited digital transfers. Agent Thomas Y. said, my eyes tracking the data lines. "Look for a Delaware-registered shell company called Blue Horizon Ventures." "I hear you," Thomas replied, the sound of radio static and secondary voices echoing in the background of his call. I am tracking a steady bleed of capital disguised as consulting fees. I continued, my fingers flying across the keys as I pulled the routing data attached to the Blue Horizon invoices. He has been funneling the stolen loan money out of Apex Synergy and into this shell for over a year. He was building an exit strategy. The routing number for the credit union is 044 followed by 291 and ending in 88. I heard the rapid clatter of a keyboard on Thomas's end of the line. He was feeding the routing data directly to the financial enforcement team, monitoring the wire traffic. "We have it," Thomas said, his voice tight with anticipation. "He is trying to move $1.2 million. The wire is queued in the clearinghouse. It is waiting for the final authentication handshake from the receiving bank in Dubai." "Stop the handshake," I said, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. The line went silent for 10 agonizing seconds. I listened to the sound of my own breathing, visualizing the invisible high-speed chase happening across the global banking network. A few lines of code were racing against the speed of a fiber optic cable, determining whether Liam would escape to a luxury high-rise in the United Arab Emirates or spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary. "Got it!" Thomas breathed, the tension breaking instantly. "The transfer is blocked. The destination bank rejected the payload due to a federal freeze request. The funds are locked in the domestic clearinghouse." I closed my eyes, feeling a sudden sharp wave of relief. The money was secured. "And your brother?" I asked. Thomas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Customs agents just intercepted him at the gate. He was holding his boarding pass and staring at his phone. He is in federal custody, Claire. The flight to Dubai is leaving without him." The reality of the arrest settled over me. The golden child, the son who had commanded all the resources and all the affection my parents possessed, was currently being escorted through an international airport in handcuffs. His tailored suit and his arrogant smirk would not save him from the fluorescent lighting of a federal holding cell. "Thank you for the quick work," Thomas said, the professional detachment returning to his voice. "We will need you to sign an affidavit authenticating the forensic trace you just provided. I will email the secure portal link to your firm this afternoon. You built a pristine trap here." "I did what was necessary," I replied. I disconnected the call and placed the receiver back in its cradle. I looked at the spreadsheet still glowing on my monitor. Blue Horizon Ventures. Liam had tried to outrun the audit, but he had forgotten the golden rule Vivian taught me. Money always leaves a footprint, and the footprint never lies. I took a sip of my melted iced coffee. The morning was barely over, and the primary architect of my family's deception was behind bars. I assumed the conflict had reached its natural conclusion. I assumed my parents would retreat into their shame and let the legal system process their son's crimes. I underestimated the depths of their desperation. 10 minutes after my call with Agent Thomas ended, my personal cell phone lit up. The caller identification displayed Patricia's number. She had never called me during business hours. I picked up the device and pressed the green button, expecting to hear the hysterical sobbing of a mother who had just been notified of her son's arrest. Instead, Patricia's voice was eerily calm, devoid of any tears or panic. It was a cold, calculated whisper that sent a sudden chill down my spine. "Liam is in jail," Patricia stated. "I am aware," I replied, keeping my tone strictly neutral. "The bail hearing is tomorrow morning." Patricia continued, ignoring my response. "His defense attorney says the judge will set the bond high because he is a demonstrated flight risk. We need cash, Claire. We need a lot of it, and all of our accounts are caught in the freeze. You cannot use Vivian's estate to post bail for a federal crime, Mom. I told you this on Friday. The probate court will not authorize a distribution." "I know," Patricia said, her voice dropping into a sinister conspiratorial register, "which is why Richard and I found an alternative solution. We found a secondary document in Vivian's safety deposit box over the weekend, a codicil to her will. It supersedes the trust you are trying to protect. It leaves the primary liquid assets directly to Richard. We are filing it with the New York Surrogate Court in 1 hour. We are going to drain the cash, post the bail, and bring your brother home." She terminated the call. I stared at the black screen of my phone. A codicil, a legal amendment designed to override a previous will. Vivian had never mentioned a codicil. Vivian despised Richard. She would never have left him control of her liquid assets. My parents were not just covering for a fraudster. They had decided to become fraudsters themselves. They were attempting to file a forged legal document in a state court to steal the bail money. The war was not over. It had just escalated to a terrifying new theater. The black screen of my cell phone reflected my own stunned expression. Patricia had just hung up after announcing her intention to commit perjury and submit a forged legal document to a New York surrogate court, a codicil leaving Vivian's liquid assets directly to Richard. The sheer staggering desperation of the maneuver was difficult to process. My parents had watched their son get arrested at an international departure gate for federal wire fraud, and their immediate response was to pivot directly into their own felony to bail him out. They were convinced that I would simply stand by and watch them loot the estate. They believed that despite everything, the conditioned passivity of the utility child would hold. They were wrong again. I set my phone face down on the desk. The adrenaline spike hit me hard, sharpening my focus into a razor edge. I had exactly 1 hour before Patricia and Richard attempted to file the fraudulent codicil. If the surrogate court accepted the document at face value and granted Richard immediate executorship over the liquid accounts, he could initiate a wire transfer to the federal bail bondsman by noon tomorrow. Once the money left the estate accounts and entered the federal bonding system, it would be almost impossible to claw back. I did not have time to draft a formal legal objection. I did not have time to hire a New York probate attorney to request an emergency hearing. I needed a blunt instrument to shatter their plan before they even reached the clerk's window. I turned back to my dual monitors. I needed leverage, and I needed it instantly. I pulled up the CSV exports of my parents' joint checking and savings accounts. These were the same ledgers I had originally reviewed to track Liam's lifestyle subsidies. But now I was not looking for outbound payments to Apex Synergy. I was looking for the inbound flow of capital. I needed to understand how Richard and Patricia, two people with no significant retirement savings and heavily mortgaged assets, were currently surviving in Chicago without the steady drip of Liam's stolen federal money. I expanded the search parameters, filtering the transactional data for the last 72 hours. I was looking for any anomaly, any sudden injection of cash that would explain Patricia's eerie, terrifying calm on the phone. The screen populated with a short list of weekend transactions: a hotel charge, a rideshare receipt, a few nominal dining expenses, and then I found it. On Saturday morning, less than 24 hours after Mr. Sterling had fired them and stormed out of the boardroom, a massive deposit had landed in Richard and Patricia's primary checking account. The amount was exactly $45,000. I scrutinized the routing information attached to the deposit. It was a domestic wire initiated from a private wealth management account located in Connecticut. I ran the account numbers through the firm's internal compliance database, cross-referencing the routing codes with public ownership registries. The name of the account holder flashed on the screen: Chloe. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing monitor. Chloe, the woman who had thrown her 5-carat engagement ring onto the mahogany table. The woman who had loudly declared she was calling her divorce attorney and abandoning Liam to the federal wolves. She had just wired my parents $45,000. The logic of the audit snapped into place, revealing a secondary layer of deceit, so calculated it almost impressed me. Chloe had not abandoned the family. Her dramatic exit in the boardroom was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to sever her legal liability in front of a witness. She wanted me to believe she was a victim, a naive wife blindsided by her husband's federal crimes. But Chloe was not naive. She was a co-conspirator attempting to salvage her own lifestyle. Liam was sitting in a federal holding cell, his assets frozen. My parents were broke, but Chloe came from a wealthy Connecticut family. She had independent, untainted capital. She had wired my parents the exact amount they needed to secure a new aggressive probate attorney in New York. The $45,000 was a retainer fee completely unencumbered by the SBA fraud investigation designed to launch the fraudulent codicil and steal Vivian's cash to bail Liam out. They were functioning as a coordinated syndicate. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the number for Agent Thomas at the SBA Office of the Inspector General. I bypassed his voicemail, utilizing the emergency extension he had provided during our morning coordination. "Agent Thomas," I said the moment he answered, "I need you to expand the scope of the asset freeze immediately." Claire Thomas sounded surprised, the background noise of the field office dropping away. "We just booked your brother into processing. What is the escalation?" "Chloe is financing a secondary operation." I explained, my voice tight and urgent. "She just wired my parents $45,000 from a private wealth account in Connecticut. They are using the funds to hire a new probate attorney in New York. They plan to file a forged codicil to my aunt's will in less than 45 minutes to steal the bail money. The line went silent for 3 seconds. When Thomas spoke again, the professional detachment was gone, replaced by the grim realization of a seasoned federal investigator tracking a mutating threat. "You are telling me the wife is actively funding an attempt to commit state-level fraud to secure a federal bail release?" Thomas asked. "I am telling you she is functioning as the syndicate's unencumbered bank," I replied. Her dramatic exit on Friday was a performance to mask her continued complicity. I heard the sound of Thomas shifting gears, shouting rapid orders to his analysts across the room. "Pull the spouse's financial profile. I need all outbound wires from her Connecticut accounts for the last 90 days. He came back on the line. "Claire, I cannot block a state probate filing from a federal desk without a direct injunction, and I cannot get a judge to sign an injunction in 45 minutes based solely on a suspicious wire transfer. I need definitive proof that Chloe is aware the original funds were stolen, or I cannot freeze her independent assets." "I have definitive proof," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I pulled up the encrypted dossier I had built on Thursday night. I accessed the audio file I had recorded when Liam called me to brag about his upcoming federal grants. I had listened to that recording half a dozen times, focusing entirely on Liam's confession. But as I opened the raw audio track in a sound editing program, I isolated the background noise behind his voice. "Agent Thomas, I am sending a targeted audio file to your secure portal right now," I said. When Liam called me on Thursday to try and extort the inheritance, he was not alone in his office. I hit send. "Listen to the audio at the 42-second mark," I instructed. "Liam is telling me about the new round of federal grants he plans to steal." But underneath his voice, you can hear a second person speaking in the background. It is a female voice. I heard the click of Thomas opening the file on his end. The audio played tinny and distorted, but clear enough for a trained ear. "Are the transfers clear for the Aspen escrow?" The female voice asked, her tone crisp and demanding. "We need the liquidity verified before the wire hits." "That is Chloe," I said. "She is actively discussing the movement of the stolen SBA funds into the escrow account for their luxury home." She was not a blind, naive spouse. She was the financial architect managing the disbursement of the laundered money. She knew exactly where the capital was coming from. Thomas let out a low whistle. The sound was a definitive confirmation of a successful hunt. "You just handed me the probable cause to freeze her independent wealth accounts as proceeds of a continuing criminal enterprise," Thomas said, the adrenaline creeping back into his voice. "The $45,000 retainer she sent your parents is now classified as complicit funding. I am locking down the wife." "What about the probate filing in New York?" I asked, checking the clock on my monitor. My parents were likely standing in the lobby of the surrogate court right now holding the forged codicil. "I am dispatching 2 field agents from our Manhattan office to the surrogate court immediately," Thomas replied, the harsh edge of federal authority snapping into place. "We are going to intercept your parents at the clerk's window. We are not just going to block the filing, Claire. We are going to detain them for attempting to submit a fraudulent document to interfere with a federal asset seizure." The trap was finally completely closed. "Thank you, Agent Thomas," I said softly. "No, Claire," Thomas corrected him. "Thank you. You just dismantled a multi-jurisdictional fraud syndicate from a desk in South Carolina before lunch." I disconnected the call. The silence of my office returned, but the heavy, oppressive weight of the last 3 years had finally lifted. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the second hand on the wall clock tick past the hour. Somewhere in a grand marble-lined courthouse in Manhattan, Patricia and Richard were about to discover that the invisible daughter they had discarded had just orchestrated their arrest. The utility child was officially off the clock, and the invoice had been paid in full. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in total systemic collapse. I did not leave Charleston. I did not fly to New York to witness my parents' humiliation, nor did I travel to Chicago to watch Chloe discover that her untouchable wealth was suddenly locked behind a federal firewall. I stayed in my quiet apartment sipping green tea and monitored the fallout through the secure portals Agent Thomas provided. The satisfaction I felt was entirely analytical, like watching a complex algorithm finally resolve without errors. On Tuesday morning, the news hit the regional business wires. Federal agents had intercepted Richard and Patricia at the clerk's window of the Manhattan surrogate court. They were holding the forged codicil, a document they believed would grant them instant access to Aunt Vivian's liquid assets. Instead of a sympathetic court clerk, they were met by two plainclothes investigators from the Inspector General's office. My parents were detained for attempting to file fraudulent documents to interfere with a federal asset seizure. Patricia, I was later told, tried to utilize her country club indignation, demanding the agents release her immediately because they were ruining her son's life. Richard attempted to blame the entire forgery on a misunderstanding regarding Vivian's final wishes. The investigators did not argue. They simply confiscated the forged codicil and escorted my parents to a federal field office for questioning. They were not formally charged that day. The federal machine moves with deliberate, methodical slowness, but the message was delivered with absolute clarity. They were no longer the aggrieved, wealthy parents fighting a probate dispute. They were active targets in a federal fraud investigation. Simultaneously, the hammer fell on Chloe. Agent Thomas utilized the isolated audio file I provided to secure an emergency injunction against her private wealth accounts in Connecticut. The $45,000 retainer she had wired to my parents was flagged as illicit funding, effectively freezing the money before the new probate attorney could even clear the transaction. Chloe was officially cut off from her independent capital. The luxury SUV she drove the down payment on the Aspen house, and now her personal checking accounts were all locked tight, classified as proceeds of a continuing criminal enterprise. Without access to cash, her aggressive divorce attorney dropped her as a client by Wednesday afternoon. The syndicate had been entirely dismantled, stripped of its funding, its legal representation, and its arrogance. On Thursday, I received a final, desperate phone call. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a legitimate forensic audit for a corporate client, when my personal cell phone vibrated. I did not recognize the number. It was a local Chicago area code. I assumed it was a reporter attempting to dig into the Apex Synergy collapse. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, I checked the message. It was Chloe. Her voice was barely recognizable. The shrill, demanding tone she had used in the boardroom was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified whisper. She sounded like a woman who had just realized she was standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Claire. Chloe choked out the sound of ragged breathing echoing in the background. Please, Claire, you have to call them off. You have to tell the agents I didn't know anything. I didn't know Liam was using your identity. I just thought we had venture capital. She paused, likely wiping tears from her face, attempting to regain a shred of the composure she had relied on for years. They froze my accounts, Claire. The trust fund from my grandfather, my savings, everything. I cannot even buy groceries. I am staying in a cheap motel by the airport. Liam is still in federal lockup because we cannot post bail. Richard and Patricia are refusing to speak to me because they think I set them up with the retainer wire. I have nothing left. I listened to the voicemail, my face entirely impassive. She was still trying to play the victim. She was still trying to pretend she was unaware of the massive fraud funding her curated lifestyle, despite the audio recording proving she actively managed the disbursements. You have the power to stop this, Chloe pleaded, her voice cracking into a desperate whine. You have your inheritance. You won. Just tell the Inspector General I was not involved. Please, Claire, I am begging you. Do not leave me out here like this. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I set the phone back on my desk. I did not feel a sudden rush of empathy. I did not feel the urge to call her back and offer a consoling word. I felt the cold, hard validation of a boundary permanently enforced. Chloe, Liam, Patricia, and Richard had spent my entire life operating under the assumption that they were the main characters in a grand narrative, and that I existed solely to facilitate their comfort. They believed their needs superseded my safety, my credit, and my future. They had sent me away, stolen my identity, and attempted to steal my inheritance, all while congratulating themselves on their own brilliance. They expected the utility child to save them when the bill finally came due. I picked up the phone, navigated to the voicemail inbox, and deleted the message. I did not save it. I did not forward it to Agent Thomas. I simply erased it, expunging the last desperate plea of a fractured dynasty from my life. I turned my attention back to the dual monitors. The commercial properties in Vivian's portfolio required my immediate attention. The probate court in New York, free from the interference of my parents' fraudulent filings, was poised to formalize the transfer of the estate into my name by the end of the month. I had a logistics warehouse in Albany that needed a new roof and a strip mall in Syracuse that required updated tenant leases. I was no longer the invisible sister hiding in the shadows of a fabricated empire. I was the sole executor of a $7 million estate, the owner of a burgeoning forensic accounting career, and the architect of my own absolute freedom. The ledger was balanced, the audit was closed, and the silence in my office felt exactly like victory. The transition from junior auditor to the sole executor of a multi-million-dollar estate did not happen overnight. The federal machine and the New York probate courts move at their own deliberate, grinding pace. But for the first time in my life, I was not anxious about the timeline. I was not waiting for the other shoe to drop or for my parents to launch a surprise attack. The board was locked, and I controlled the only key. By late October, the humidity in Charleston had finally broken, leaving behind crisp, cool mornings. I sat at my kitchen island, a mug of black coffee in hand, reviewing the final probate transfer documents sent by Vivian's estate attorney. The attorney, a meticulous woman named Sarah, who had worked with Vivian for decades, had called me earlier that week to confirm the details. The surrogate court formally rejected the fraudulent codicil your parents attempted to file. Sarah had explained, her tone laced with professional satisfaction. Given their current status as subjects in an active federal investigation, the judge stripped them of any standing to contest the original trust. The assets are cleared for transfer, Claire. The commercial real estate portfolio, the liquid accounts, all of it. You are officially the sole owner. I looked at the stack of legal papers resting on my granite countertop. $7 million in assets. It was a staggering amount of wealth, but I did not view it as a lottery winning. I viewed it as a responsibility. Vivian had built this portfolio through decades of shrewd, quiet calculation. She had lived modestly, investing her capital into strip malls and logistics centers, while her sister Patricia squandered every cent on leased luxury and curated illusions. Vivian left this to me because she knew I possessed the same quiet discipline. She knew I would not burn it down to impress strangers. I signed the final transfer documents, placed them in a secure envelope, and scheduled a courier to deliver them back to New York. As I sealed the envelope, my laptop chimed with an incoming encrypted email. It was from Agent Thomas at the SBA Office of the Inspector General. The subject line read, "Final Status Update." I opened the message. The email was brief, adhering to strict federal communication protocols, but the subtext was loud and clear. Claire Thomas wrote, "The grand jury convened yesterday. Based on the forensic dossier you provided, including the IP logs, the forged origination documents, and the audio recording, they have handed down a multi-count federal indictment against your brother. The charges include wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." I paused, reading the list of charges a second time. Aggravated identity theft carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Liam was not going to negotiate a plea deal that involved probation or a slap on the wrist. He was facing hard federal time. Thomas continued, "The asset forfeiture warrants have been executed. We seized the down payment for the Aspen property and recovered the vehicle driven by his spouse, because you provided definitive proof of her complicity regarding the movement of the stolen funds. Her private wealth accounts remain frozen pending further review by the Department of Justice. Furthermore, the $45,000 wire transfer she initiated to your parents has been clawed back by the Treasury Department." The final piece of the syndicate had been dismantled. Chloe's independent wealth, the safety net she assumed would protect her from Liam's collapse, was now firmly under federal control. She was financially stranded. I scrolled to the last paragraph of the email. "Regarding your IRS Form 211 whistleblower submission," Thomas concluded, "the recovery of the stolen SBA funds is nearly complete. The whistleblower office has authorized your bounty payment. Based on the quality and the immediate actionable nature of your intelligence, they approved an award at the higher end of the spectrum. You will receive a secure direct deposit for $90,000 within 14 business days. Thank you for your service to this agency." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. $90,000. The federal government was paying me nearly $100,000 for exposing the brother who had stolen my identity. It was a profound, almost poetic return on investment. Liam had used my pristine credit history to secure $500,000 in fraudulent loans to build a fake tech company. I had used my skills as an auditor to secure $90,000 in legitimate federal funds to launch my own reality. I closed the email and shut the laptop. The silence in my apartment was complete and absolute. I did not feel the urge to call anyone to brag. I did not feel the need to post a cryptic message on social media. The validation I sought was entirely internal. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Charleston skyline. I thought about the 7 summers I spent in upstate New York, sitting at Vivian's kitchen table, learning how to balance a ledger while my family sailed across the Mediterranean. I thought about the blue duffel bag, the rushed goodbyes, and the deep, pervasive feeling that I was an accessory to my own family, a utility meant to be stored away when not needed. They had sent me away to protect their golden child. They had isolated me to ensure Liam received all the resources, all the attention, and all the grace. They did not realize they were sending me to the only person capable of teaching me how to destroy them. Vivian did not just leave me her wealth. She left me the blueprint for my own survival. She taught me that true power does not require a loud voice or a luxury car. True power is the ability to read the fine print, to follow the money, and to strike with absolute devastating precision when the moment requires it. I picked up my empty coffee mug and placed it in the sink. The audit was finished. The utility child had officially resigned. The future stretching out in front of me was vast, solvent, and entirely my own. The aftermath of a collapsed dynasty is not a sudden explosion. It is a slow, quiet erosion. As the winter months settled over Charleston, bringing a crisp edge to the coastal air, the final updates regarding my family trickled in through secondary channels. I did not seek the information out, but when you are the sole whistleblower in a major federal fraud case, the legal ecosystem tends to keep you informed. Liam did not take his case to trial. The evidence I provided the Inspector General was too comprehensive, too tightly bound by IP logs, audio recordings, and forged signatures. Faced with the reality of a multi-count federal indictment and the threat of consecutive mandatory minimums, his aggressive defense attorney advised capitulation. In late January, Liam signed a plea agreement. He pled guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. The sentencing hearing took place in a federal courthouse in Chicago. I did not attend. I had no desire to sit in a polished mahogany gallery and watch my brother weep for a leniency he never extended to me. I requested that the prosecuting attorney forward me the sentencing memorandum once the judge issued the final order. The document arrived in my secure inbox on a Tuesday afternoon. The federal judge did not share Patricia's belief that Liam was a visionary entrepreneur who simply made a mistake under pressure. The judge viewed him as a calculating fraudster who had exploited a federal relief program and weaponized his own sister's identity to fund a vanity project. Liam was sentenced to 48 months in a federal correctional facility, 4 years. I was also ordered to pay massive restitution, though the seizure of the Aspen down payment and the clawback of the remaining liquid funds covered the bulk of the stolen SBA loans. The court mandated a secondary layer of financial penalties, effectively guaranteeing that when Liam eventually walked out of prison, he would be financially crippled for the next decade. The golden child, the son who had demanded the best of everything, was now a federal inmate assigned a numbered jumpsuit and a strict daily schedule dictated by a warden. The curated social media posts and the chartered flights were replaced by concrete walls and monitored phone calls. The fallout for Patricia and Richard was equally devastating, though entirely civil. They avoided federal indictment for the forged codicil, largely because they never successfully filed it, and the agents who intercepted them chose to focus their resources on Liam's primary fraud. But avoiding prison did not save them from the financial wreckage they had engineered. Without Liam's stolen funds subsidizing their lifestyle, and without the massive influx of cash they expected to steal from Vivian's estate, the reality of their massive debt rapidly caught up with them. They were heavily leveraged. The country club memberships were revoked for non-payment. The leased luxury vehicles were repossessed. By early spring, they were forced to put the sprawling Ohio house on the market. It sold quickly, but the proceeds were immediately swallowed by the underlying mortgages and the legal debts they had incurred attempting to fight the federal freeze. Patricia and Richard relocated to a small rented apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, desperate to stay close to the federal facility where Liam was housed. Their social standing, the very foundation of Patricia's identity, was completely obliterated. The friends who had once attended their lavish dinner parties stopped returning their calls, eager to distance themselves from a family actively embroiled in a federal scandal. They were reduced to living the exact modest, restricted life they had spent decades trying to avoid. And then there was Chloe. Chloe's attempt to play the naive victim failed spectacularly. The Department of Justice utilized the audio recording to classify her private wealth accounts as heavily commingled with the proceeds of Liam's wire fraud. They did not seize her entire trust fund, but they levied massive fines and clawed back every cent that could be tangibly linked to the maintenance of her lifestyle during the fraud period. She divorced Liam while he was awaiting transfer to the federal facility. She took whatever untainted assets remained and quietly relocated to a different state, erasing herself from the narrative just as quickly as she had inserted herself into it. The 5-carat diamond ring she had thrown onto the boardroom table was auctioned off by federal marshals to cover a portion of the restitution. The syndicate was dead. I sat in my apartment in Charleston, the sentencing memorandum glowing on my monitor. The quiet satisfaction I felt was deep and permanent. I had not destroyed my family. I had simply held up a mirror, forcing them to confront the exact consequences of the actions they chose to take. They built a house of cards on a foundation they did not own, and when the wind finally blew, the collapse was entirely their own doing. I closed the PDF and logged out of the secure portal. The past was officially closed. The $90,000 whistleblower bounty had cleared my account 3 weeks prior. It sat in a newly established corporate holding account, untouched and ready to be deployed. I did not intend to use the money for a luxury vacation or a down payment on an expensive car. I intended to honor the woman who had made my survival possible. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for a commercial real estate broker I had been consulting with over the past month. "Good afternoon, Claire," the broker answered promptly. "I have the final lease agreement for the office space on King Street. The landlord accepted our terms." "Excellent," I replied, standing up and walking toward the window overlooking the city. "I will wire the security deposit and the first 6 months of rent this afternoon." "We are good to go," the broker said. "What name should I put on the final signage order for the lobby directory?" I smiled, looking out at the bright, clear South Carolina sky. "Foster and Webb Forensic Accounting," I said, combining Vivian's maiden name with my own. I disconnected the call. I was 22 years old. I owned a $7 million commercial real estate portfolio, and I was launching my own forensic accounting firm, using the bounty I received for exposing the people who tried to break me. The utility child had not just survived, she had inherited the earth. 2 years have passed since the heavy oak doors of the Chicago boardroom swung shut behind me. It is late July, the peak of the South Carolina summer. I am sitting on the expansive wooden deck of a beach house on Sullivan's Island. The Atlantic Ocean stretches out in front of me, dark blue and rolling steadily toward the shore. I am not here because someone packed a blue duffel bag and shipped me away to clear space for a European vacation. I am here because I rented this premium beachfront property for the entire month. Inside the house, the sound of my friends laughing echoes over the rhythmic crash of the waves. They are colleagues, mentors, and peers who know my exact worth and demand nothing from me but my company. We are preparing a seafood boil in the kitchen, the scent of crab and Old Bay seasoning drifting through the screen doors. The contrast between this summer and the 7 I spent in forced exile is stark, deliberate, and deeply satisfying. The dust from the Apex Synergy collapse settled a long time ago. Aunt Vivian's commercial real estate portfolio transitioned smoothly into my name, free from the interference of fraudulent codicils and desperate litigation. Rather than simply lease out all the properties and collect passive income, I decided to plant my own flag. I repurposed one of the prime brick-lined retail spaces in downtown Charleston. That building is now the official headquarters of my own firm. The polished brass plaque mounted beside the glass entry doors reads Foster and Webb Forensic Accounting. The $90,000 whistleblower bounty I received from the federal government served as my initial seed capital. It funded the encrypted servers, the proprietary auditing software, and the starting salaries for my first 3 junior analysts. Every morning I walk into an office I own, built with funds I earned by exposing the brother who tried to ruin me. We specialize in corporate fraud detection, embezzlement tracking, and asset recovery. I spend my days teaching my young analysts how to look past the glossy surface of a financial statement, passing down the exact same lessons Vivian taught me at her kitchen table. I built a thriving solvent empire on the precise foundation my family attempted to steal. 1,000 miles away, Liam is living a very different daily routine. He is exactly 24 months into his 48-month sentence at a federal correctional institution. The man who once chartered private flights, wore bespoke Italian suits, and commanded boardrooms now dictates his entire existence by the sound of a mechanical buzzer. He wears a standard-issue khaki uniform. He eats his meals on a partitioned plastic tray in a crowded, deafening cafeteria. The arrogance that defined his personality has been stripped away by the relentless grinding monotony of federal time. His days blur together in a rigid schedule of headcounts and menial labor assignments. He has ample time to sit on his narrow bunk and calculate the exact cost of his hubris. He knows the sister he treated as a disposable asset is the architect of his confinement. He knows the federal government paid her a premium bounty to lock his cage. The curated illusion he spent his youth building is nothing but a distant, humiliating memory. The collateral damage extends far beyond the prison walls. Patricia and Richard currently reside in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a gray industrial suburb outside of Chicago. They chose the bleak location to remain within driving distance of Liam's facility for weekend visitation hours. Their former sprawling estate, the country club memberships, and the curated social prestige vanished overnight. Richard works a mid-level administrative job in a logistics warehouse. He rides a commuter train each morning, dedicating the bulk of his paycheck to slowly chip away at the crushing mountain of civil legal debt they incurred, attempting to fight the federal freeze. Patricia spends her days in a small living room with laminate countertops. She arranges discount grocery store flowers in cheap vases, attempting to maintain a fractured, hollow illusion of elegance in a space that defies it. The society friends who once flocked to their lavish dinner parties erased their numbers from their contact lists the moment the federal indictments hit the press. The phone in their apartment rarely rings. They are isolated, tethered only to the ghost of the son they ruined through their own blind indulgence. They are living the exact restricted anonymous life they spent decades stepping on me to avoid. Chloe finalized her divorce before Liam even faced the sentencing judge. She leveraged the remaining untainted fragments of her grandfather's trust to relocate to a quiet, unremarkable neighborhood in the Pacific Northwest. She reverted to her maiden name, scrubbing her digital presence clean to avoid the lingering stain of the wire fraud scandal. She walked away with a fraction of her former wealth and faded into quiet obscurity, a fitting end for a woman who built her identity on stolen capital. The 5-carat diamond ring she once flaunted was auctioned off by federal marshals to cover a portion of the restitution. I take a slow sip of iced tea and lean back against the wooden deck chair. The sun dips lower on the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the tidal pools. I do not harbor lingering anger toward the people who shared my last name. Anger requires an ongoing emotional investment, and I closed that account the moment I walked out of the Chicago law firm. They engineered their own demise. They believed they could extract my future to finance their present, relying on a lifetime of conditioned silence. They miscalculated the silent daughter. If you spend years teaching a child to be invisible, you should not be surprised when they learn how to navigate the dark. You should not be shocked when they learn to read the hidden mechanics of the room, to trace the wires, and to understand exactly how the machine operates. The greatest mistake my parents made was assuming my quiet compliance was a symptom of weakness. It was merely observation. I watched them structure their lies. I watched them build a dynasty on leverage and deceit. And when they finally came for my sanctuary, I simply showed the world their true ledger. True vindication does not arrive in a screaming match across a dining room table. It does not require a dramatic, tearful confrontation or a desperate plea for validation. The best revenge is not fighting for a seat at a toxic table. The best revenge is walking away, building your own table, and ensuring the math is flawless. I am 23 years old. I own my time. I own my business. I own my future. And my ledger is perfectly balanced. The sun dips below the horizon on Sullivan's Island, turning the Atlantic into a sheet of dark glass. I listen to the laughter echoing from my kitchen, the sound of chosen family, and I think about the girl who used to stand on a gravel driveway in upstate New York, clutching a blue duffel bag. I spent my childhood believing my worth was tied to my utility, convinced that shrinking myself was the rent I owed to exist in my parents' orbit. Walking away from that illusion was the hardest thing I ever did, but it taught me the rules of real survival. If you are listening to this and recognizing your own reflection in my story, I want to leave you with 3 truths I carved out of the wreckage. First, never mistake silence for weakness. When a family conditions you to be invisible, they unknowingly hand you the ultimate tactical advantage. You become the observer. You learn the architecture of their lies, the hidden resentments, and the structural flaws in their grand narratives. While they are busy performing for the crowd, you are learning how the stage is built. When the time comes to protect yourself, you will know exactly where to pull the linchpin. Second, shared DNA is not a blank check. Blood does not entitle anyone to your credit score, your inheritance, or your peace of mind. For years, I allowed the phrase, "family supports family," to act as a blindfold, ignoring the fact that the support only ever flowed in one direction. Loyalty that requires you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm is not love. It is an extortion racket. You have every right to cut the cord and walk out of the burning house. Third, true retribution does not require a raised voice. Society conditions us to believe that confronting our abusers requires a dramatic, tearful shouting match across a dinner table. It does not. Emotion is a currency predators feed on. The most devastating response to manipulation is cold, unshakable evidence. Let the spreadsheets, the audit logs, and the legal filings do the talking. The best revenge is not destroying their world. It is building your own solvent, unassailable reality and locking them out of it forever. The utility child is a role you can resign from at any moment. You just have to be willing to drop the script and write your own. If my journey resonated with you, or if you are currently balancing your own ledger against a family that underestimated your worth, let me know in the comments. Share this video with anyone who needs the courage to stop paying for a seat at a toxic table. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and keep tuning in to Ariana Revenger for more stories where the quiet ones finally get the last word. I will see you in the next one.